This episode is brought to you by the Command Presence Leadership Institute. Find out more by visiting commandpresence.net.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership with Michael Warren. Be the leader you wish that you had.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership podcast, where we believe that leadership is about two things. It's about people and it's about actions. We talk from leaders from across society who are stepping up to do what they can, where they are with what they have. The question is, what can we learn from them? What can we learn from each other as we strive to be the leader we wish we had? Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Warren, and I'm your host. Thank you for being with us today. I need to go ahead and throw out a disclaimer if I could real quick. As we're recording this, I have construction going on at my house, having some windows replaced. So if you hear any banging in the background, that is not me falling out of my chair, probably. But it could be my kids downstairs in the basement where they've been banished for the recording. Just wanted to throw that out there. There is construction going on. But before we get into today's episode, I really hope that you folks have taken the time to listen to our previous episodes. Over the past several weeks, I believe that our guests have really given us a lot to think about and consider. And we've had people from education, from consulting work, from a drone company, from the military. It's amazing to me as I go back and I listen to the episodes once they've been released, you know, that even talking to them in the conversation, I sometimes miss things. So I would encourage you to go back and listen to them if you haven't. You can find all of the previous episodes on your favorite podcast provider, or you can find them on our website at www.commandpresence.net/podcast. All right, but today we are going to take a look into a part of the public safety family that, quite honestly, very few people ever see. It's a link in the chain that often goes unseen, it's seldom heard, and it is often neglected. And what I'm speaking about, folks, I'm talking about our 911 centers. I'm talking about our PSAPs, our dispatch centers. And so our guest today actually began his journey in public service and 911 operations back in 1998. Quick pause here for our listeners. 1998 seems a lot closer in time than what it actually is. Just throwing that out there. In 1998, where he served as a midnight shift telecommunicator in a medium-sized 911 center. Throughout his 26 years as a public safety professional, he served as a trainer, a supervisor, and a director of the Weakley County 911 in Tennessee. He also has served as a statewide training coordinator for the Tennessee Emergency Communications Board, where he has trained over 2,400 telecommunicators across the state. He is an influential voice in the public safety industry, and he's received many awards, including the Tennessee APCO Director of the Year Award, the Senator Joe Haynes Award for Excellence, and the Nina Hall of Fame Award. That is one thing you'll never see in front of my name, folks, Hall of Fame. Welcome on board Jamison Peevyhouse, who serves currently as the Vice President for Public Safety for RapidSOS. Jamison, welcome to the podcast.
And thanks so much, Michael. I really appreciate it.
When you start hearing numbers like 2,400 telecommunicators across the state, just throwing it out there, no matter what industry you're in, if you're reaching that many people and having impact on that many people, man, it really is a force multiplier. And so trainers really need to be serious about their job, don't they?
Yeah, Michael, that's a solid point. We learned a lot during COVID. And the reason was because we had to move very quickly to be able to adapt to that training situation that we needed to have for folks who are working 24-hour shifts work. And so the only way we could do that from a statewide perspective is online training. And that was something new for us as a state to be able to provide really, point of presence training, just-in-time training, however you want to call that, for every single telecommunicator. And during COVID, there was no remote work for 911. Call volumes are going up. We were having more folks staff in the comm center. So really the threat to our employees was really high. So a lot of our just-in-time training centered around how do we protect employees, how do we protect responders, and then how do we effectively respond and manage these COVID situations, particularly in the first 3 months.
The COVID was a paradigm changer in the training world, no matter what the profession. But I think that dispatch is unique in that, number one, they have to go to work. This isn't something they can do remotely because of the equipment and all the material, that there's no way of transferring that to a home environment. But these folks, the equipment is already set up. It's not like you can redesign your dispatch center for the most part. And so they're having to work in close proximity. So from a leadership perspective, it seems like that, especially working on a statewide level, that you really had to develop some new protocols for the protection of your people, but ensuring that they get the training that they need. How do you as a leader handle that type of change? Because it's uncharted territory.
It is. And fortunately, dealing with disasters in the past, you learn a hard lesson. And like during a disaster, the rules may change, but not the mission. And if you think about how rules can be applied for a specific window of time for a specific incident, that helps you understand, like, hey, let's focus on the things that matter the most right now. Is training about train derailments important right now? Probably not. So how do we effectively do that? And I had a fantastic boss at the state. And I sat down with him. I said, listen, sir, we've got to think about this from the standpoint of this training is not going to be polished. It's not going to be really pretty. It's not going to have, a lot of great slide decks. What it's going to be is powerful. And because right now it's more important to transfer the information and knowledge to these folks so they can change the behavior that better protects them and their responders locally. And I think just understanding that little bit of a shift there during those small windows of time, the rules are changing for a limited window, but the mission remains the same.
To try to get it looking all pretty, that would have taken time and resources that simply weren't available. For those of you who don't remember, and I don't know how you don't remember if you're listening, when COVID hit and the shutdown happened, it wasn't a transition. It was a light switch. It wasn't a dimmer switch. It was an on or off thing. And so it had to be a quick transition. And so would you agree with me that perhaps one of the leadership qualities that, especially in today's environment, is really needed is agility? That ability to respond quickly to changes in the market, to changes in the environment. How hard is that for a leader if you're not planning on being agile?
It's very difficult, and it has to be something that you're invested in daily. Most of us can't stand the term, we've always done it this way. And yet, when something tragic occurs or something that's very impactful to our citizens or to our employees, we revert back to the level of training that we've always done. And so if we're not training to be adaptive, agile during the moments where it doesn't really matter, we're not going to be able to do that when it does matter. And so having that concept of how can we move quickly to make changes, we can do an iterative decision-making process. We make a small change, we measure it, looks great, make another small change. That didn't work. Okay, let's swap directions 3 degrees. And I think that helps us out so much. And I honestly think you could see this just right after COVID started hitting the tech sector. And it's, we had to pivot. And for me, I was thinking, we didn't have to pivot. We just did a small course correction, 2 or 3 degrees to get us back on path to make sure that we're serving our citizens better. If you have to pivot constantly, you're not planning effectively and your leadership is lacking. And that's a hard thing to say, but if you really study that, pivots mean we were going the wrong direction and we weren't looking up.
The ability to look into the future and forecast future problems. And please correct me if I'm wrong here. It seems that those that are managers rather than leaders, they struggle with those pivots that you just talked about because, that there's these established things, the way we've always done it. That doesn't mean that the way we've always done it was wrong. It's just no longer effective. Where leaders can chart the path, they cut new paths so that the mission can be accomplished.
You're absolutely correct. And I love the fact that we understand human nature. And we think about some managers are very process driven. Give me the protocol stack. Let me run the protocol stack. We actually do our quality assurance in public safety against the protocol stack. Did you answer the questions correctly? Did you ask them correctly? Did you phrase them correctly? That's incredibly important. We can't take away from that. But there are also moments that we have to look at that and say, you know what? During a hurricane, did it really matter if I missed a question in the protocol stack when a person was drowning? Probably not. And so that leadership says during these moments, we can kind of have a little bit of a leeway in this process because the mission is what matters. It's the saving of a life, not did we answer every single question correctly. And that has to be, again, a limited window of time so that we get back to the process and we can review it later and say, after this incident, maybe we should adjust this process. We've seen this in public safety for the way we handle active assailants. Previously, if you look at how the active assailant threats unfolded over the course of time, the human populace, when that assailant occurred, you could see them running out the same door they came in, regardless of where they were at, supermarket, church, whatever it may be, school. They will only go out the door they came in because that's human nature. What we did was we looked at this and said, you know what? We should be teaching the public that any exit is a viable exit during active assailant. Do not run towards the assailant because that's the door you came in. Run out the back door. And it's those leadership moments where we recognize, yeah, we've done it this way before. We haven't reviewed this in 10 years. This is a new threat analysis. Like, how do we actually change that process to make sure that we're doing the mission, which is taking care of the people?
I love what you said there, the exit, because I do a lot of flying for work, and I always listen to the safety briefing because of the psychological effects that it has. That if you listen to it, no matter how many times you've heard it, you're acknowledging that you might have to use it. You're actually better prepared to do it. But one of the things that they say in there, here's where the exits are. Take time now to locate the closest one, keeping in mind it might be behind you, because what they found is that where do people try to go get off the plane when there's an emergency? The same exact. Yep. So that's a beautiful way of putting it. So let me ask you this then. What is a protocol stack? What is it that you're talking about there? So I have a better understanding of what's going on.
Absolutely. So in 911, your leading organizations refer to protocols for the way they handle and process calls for service. And so as you answer, location, get the information about the location, get some very primary 2 or 3 questions. What's your primary need today? Maybe it's having chest pains. The protocol stack says as soon as I put in chest pain, the protocol stack for cardiac incident comes up and it gives me a list of questions to work through. And as I work through those questions, it has an algorithm in the back end that says, this is the level of response you should have. This is the appropriate resource for that response. Here's the closest responder. And that protocol stack helps us to really process hundreds or thousands of calls in a daily system to say, okay, we're doing these all the same way. Everyone's getting the same level of service. And we know that the protocol providers here in the U.S. and others actually look at this and say, hey, how do we refine these things to make them better for how humans are interacting? And so during COVID, there was no protocol really for COVID. I mean, we did difficulty breathing, but it was like, okay, that's a little bit different than have you been exposed to, someone who has COVID type symptoms in the last 24 hours. That changed the response. And so then we had to change the protocol. So those moments in time where changes need to happen, leaders recognize those and they embrace those. They're not always bad. They're awesome opportunities to provide better level of service.
And again, please correct me if I'm wrong. The protocols are designed to take the call taker down the right path.
Correct.
And the truth is, the less experienced the call taker is, the more important those protocol stacks are, correct?
That's correct. I mean, early in my career, we didn't have protocol stacks. You came to work, you spent a few weeks in training, and you try to learn how to handle every call. How do you handle accident with injuries? How do you handle accident without injuries? Well, how do you handle a cardiac incident? And it was incredibly stressful. We had high burnout rate, high turnover rate, because it was so difficult. Like, I may understand EMS calls really well, but you give me a fire call, I would freak out. Like, oh, I don't want to handle the fire call. I just don't want to do that. Protocols allow us to say, learn this system and how it works. Learn how the algorithm leads you down this path. Walk the path with the stack, and the path will lead you to the correct answer. And that's so much less stressful on the telecommunicator and increases our service level to the person on the phone who's having a need. That may be the only time they actually interact with 911 in their life. And if we have the right process in place to be able to serve them, they're going to remember that.
Now, I know that you've done a lot of training. You've also served in leadership roles. It has been my experience, and it is my belief that leaders, if we're training our people correctly, what we're training them for is to know when to deviate from the protocols. One of my favorite leadership books, my listeners, they've heard it before, but it's Call Sign Chaos by General James Mattis. And he talks about in there, he says, what every good thing, there also comes a bad thing associated with it. And he was talking about the improvement in battlefield communications. As a battalion commander during the first Gulf War, he talked about how you had people in the rear that were looking for minute by minute updates from the on-scene commander. And he says what we were actually doing was priming those people on the front lines not to make a decision, because why should I make a decision if I can just ask my boss to make the decision for us? Right. But I don't necessarily want a second lieutenant deviating if they have very little experience. But if I've got a 20-year dispatcher sitting at the console, maybe it's a familiarity with the address or familiarity with the person that they're dealing with, that it may call for deviation. So I think that the protocol stacks, that they're incredibly valuable, but I think we have to be careful that when somebody has a lot of training and a lot of experience deviates, that we as leaders we elicit from them their thought process so we understand what was going on.
That's a solid point, man. And I can give a couple examples just personally. I always tell my folks, listen, the ultimate goal here is the resolution of the incident. And I'm giving you a 4-lane highway to get there. And as long as you stay out of the ditches, right? Gross negligence, etc., stay out of the ditches, go down the path, get it resolved. I will back you. And if you mess up, I will back you. We'll have a conversation in private, but I will stand the gap for you. Now, if you get into the ditch, it's gross negligence or whatever, we're going to have a different conversation. But leadership understands, like, hey, there may be a moment where I make a decision in this process and it turns out great. And I might make that same decision 2 weeks later and it goes downhill. Leaders have to understand, you know what? I have to give you space to make the decision, and I give you space for the ultimate outcome, because that's the only way we lead, the only way we learn.
I think that where leaders struggle with that is that when I am evaluating the decision, I have to take myself back in time to the moment the decision was made based upon the information they had available at the time and the context of what was going on. Because when we're talking about a 911 center, and this is true in many professions, I may be evaluating their decision they made on this call right here, but there were other calls going on in the dispatch center as well. There was activity from my fellow dispatchers who were in the center with me. And all of those things right there have an impact on my decision.
You're right. And this is just not for, public safety facing. We employ this same principle in the teams I lead today. And it's very simple. In the absence of clear direction, make the best decision possible with the information at hand, as long as it's for the good of our customer and it meets our core values. You do that. I've been on planes traveling across the country, and I will land and I'll have a text message. Hey, so-and-so happened in this large city. Several officers were injured. Just want to let you know, I spent $600 to send, dinner to the comm center for the next 2 days. My reply, good. That's a lot of money. For a business, that's a lot of money. But at the same time, they didn't have clear direction at the moment because we were in the air. They were going to check with me at that moment. They knew they had to do something, and they knew this place is going to be on lockdown for the next 24 hours. And so they understanding what our people are going through allows us to serve them, but we've got to give them some leniency. Now, did we have to answer for the $600? Sure. But again, it met our core values. And that's the most important piece there. It gives us a basis to build on.
Yeah, would you agree, though, that in order for them to make decisions that help us meet our core values, it requires on the part of our leadership that they have communicated the core values and had those discussions on a regular basis so that it's ingrained. It's the way we do business every single day rather than just on the worst day.
Brother, you're hitting the nail on the head. Many years ago, the comm center, we had some turnover issues. We had some employee issues, and we were trying to find better ways of hiring the right person. And if you've worked in public safety very long, particularly in small jurisdictions, you basically hire the best of the applicant pool that you have for your geography. Meaning there's a subset of people who are willing to be in public safety. And then there's a smaller subset of people in the applicant pool that are worthy of being in public safety. And that's very difficult. when it comes down to making the decision between A or B, this person or that, we hire for culture and then we empower for success. That's tough because sometimes the person you hire for culture, maybe they don't pick up things quite as quick. Maybe they don't learn quite as quick. Maybe it requires a little bit more training time with them. However, the long-term impacts to your organization are incredible. We hired a person one time and we had a lot of raised eyebrows. Like, they're great, but you might could find someone better. And we stuck our neck out. We're like, hey, we hired for culture. And there were a few times this person made some mistakes. And we would sit down with them. It's like, here's the mistake you made. Do you understand this process? Here's why we do it differently. And that person's response was, I understand. I will never do it that way again. And they never deviated from that. Every time that came up again, they handled it the correct way. That person grew our culture and the way we served each other inside the comm center to a different level. And those moments are incredibly important. And you have to see those things. You're right. Understand the values before you ever start putting out applications. Understand the values before you start the interview process. Understand the values before you actually interview and then hire someone, so that you're hiring for your values and you're empowering for that success.
Man, that's powerful right there. So if I understand that, leadership is a process, right? It's not a one and done deal. So from your experience, you started as a practitioner and then you eventually became the director. How do you as a leader go about keeping people that you're responsible for engaged when in the case of 911 operators and dispatchers, they are often, as we said in the intro, unseen, seldom heard from, and underappreciated? How do you keep them engaged with the overall mission of the organization?
I will tell you, I've had great leaders in my own life, great leaders at the board level, great leaders in my personal life. But really, Michael, where I learned the most is where I failed the most. And you can ask anybody who's ever worked with me. Yeah, Jamison failed a lot. He did. But he shared those failures with me. And then it gave me a little bit of space to understand that if I made a mistake, it's okay. Now, did we highlight the amazing things that we were doing? Absolutely. There's a pivotal moment for me that I think about from the comm center. And it's like, how do you highlight the work they're doing? And that's tough because you're right. It's the old fungi thing, right? Put them in a dark room, feed them full of crap, and watch them grow. And that's what telecommunicators do, man. And it's like, how do you highlight those things? And so we had an opportunity one time. And as leaders, you are constantly searching for opportunities. What are the moments that I can highlight my team? And we were standing in front of we had a dinner one night for the fire chiefs of the entire jurisdiction, along with county commissioners, the folks on the budget committee, county leadership, mayors, et cetera. And they said, hey, can you give a 5-minute presentation on 911? Sure. Right. So I stood up in front of the class. It's like, hey, does everybody understand how many calls for service we did last year for fire calls? And they were like, nobody can answer, right? The individual fire chief could say, I did 10 or I did 50. Okay. How many accidents with injuries did we handle last year? And I just kept going. How many domestics did we handle last year? How many house fires that involve fatalities did we handle last year? How many tornadoes did we handle last year? And I went in this long list. And of course, you could just see them kind of getting a little bit flustered, like, oh, we don't know. Stop asking. And I said, the answer is simple. All of them. We handled all of them. Now, you may have seen a fire truck, a police officer, you may have seen EMS, you may have seen rescue services. But what you didn't see that was always present was the telecommunicator from start to finish. And you start seeing that change in understanding about the importance of what we do. And so when it's in the paper, hey, we want to add 10 more SROs to our schools and 15 more officers to our streets. How many telecommunicators are you going to add?
Right.
Because that is an increase in workload. And so how do you make the unseen seen? It's very difficult. And I have to refer it back to, you do not see oxygen, but you need it. And the same is true of telecommunicators across this country.
But with oxygen, if it becomes absent, you will figure that out pretty quickly. And that's kind of the way it is with our dispatchers.
Yes, sir.
So I do a lot of teaching of law enforcement personnel. And one of the things I talk about with officers is that, hey, listen, if you're dispatched on a rollover with an ejection, okay, and it's on a major highway during rush hour, I said, you're going to get one call. So, but how many calls does dispatch get? And it's funny, I use the same terminology. I said, all of them. All of them.
Yeah.
And you can't discount that when somebody calls and says, I'm reporting an accident. Hey, we've already got that. We've got people en route. You have to go through a series of questions to ensure that there's not a second accident that is similar to the first. That creates stress because if for anybody who's ever sat in a dispatch center, when something bad happens, it's like the Christmas tree light up and the noise level increases, and just that alone increases your stress. And yet dispatch has to be able to methodically work through it, phone call by phone call, to ensure that the service is delivered as it should.
You're correct, man. And if we're looking over the horizon here, if we're looking 2 years from today, just 24 months, Frost and Sullivan put out a report that says within 24 months of today, the number of IoT devices, smart homes, smart buildings, smart cars, etc., sending in requests for service to emergency services, the dispatch center, will outpace phone calls.
Really?
Yeah. So who are you hiring today for that moment? Because it's coming. It's coming. It's not an avalanche of data, right? And that we talk so much about data and how do you lead in this changing paradigm of public safety? And you have to sit down and say, in the comm center, the telecommunicator does one thing. They receive information that they process in order to make a decision. That's the ultimate goal of telecommunicator when you boil it down. Data is information used to make a decision. And so all these different inputs, audio coming in, it's analog, etc., seeing things on a screen, seeing things from the vehicle, we're starting to see that telecommunication actually operate at a higher level when the data is flowing through first, and then we can actually have customer service with a caller that comes after that information comes through. And that may be 30 seconds. It may be 4 or 5 minutes before the caller actually passes by and says, oh, there's a car wreck. Yes, ma'am, we're aware of that. Can you tell if anybody's hurt, etc.? Those things are incredibly important for us to learn now. We can't be caught off guard like we were with COVID. Right, that was something that we did not see coming. The change in paradigm of how we handle emergency response in this country and across this globe is changing in the next 24 months. And it's digital. And we've got to figure out ways to make sure that we are hiring for the right people, we're empowering them, and that starts today in leadership positions. So how do we figure that out? No, that's a different conversation, I think.
Jamison, it's like a quaint little small town that's at the edge of a metropolitan area. And as the metropolitan area expands, the population increases in that small town. And all the people that have lived there for years, they're pissed off about it, right? Because they want the quiet small town, and they resist the growth in the small town. But the growth is coming. The idea is how do we prepare for it? How do we manage it properly so that it has as little impact as possible on the way our town operates? And that sounds an awful lot like we need to do. I know you don't, the vast majority of the people in the dispatch centers don't want that increase in digital calls. I know they don't want it, but it's coming. So how do we go about management? And that's where the leader has to show the way.
Agreed. And when I joined the comm center, started in dispatch in 98, one of the first meetings I was able to go to with our director was in Memphis, Tennessee. And the conversation was around, hey, there's these new things called cell phones. They're able to call 911. Should we do something about that? And every director in the room said, no, we're not taking 911 calls from cell phones. We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know their names. We don't know their phone numbers. We're just not going to do it. And the public said, yeah, you are. And so then we started with phase 0, phase 1, phase 2 wireless, and then device-based hybrid with RapidSOS. We started changing that paradigm. The public expectation drives emergency response, and the speed at which it's driving it today is changing drastically. So we have to be prepared for that. We have to be leading now. And honestly, I believe it starts with a hiring process. Like, what do you want your culture to be in 2 years? Oh, I would like for it to be this. Then you should be hiring for that today, because it's going to change, but we have to change with it.
Absolutely. And so that leads into another part. If we want a higher quality applicant, which affords us better quality people 2 years from now, right?
Yes.
Then one of the things that I think a leader has to address, and I want to see how you suggest we do it in any organization, it doesn't matter what the industry is. We often have what I like to refer to as silos of importance. Mm-hmm. You've got, if you're an engineering firm, then the engineers are considered the backbone of that organization. In the military, in the Army, for example, the infantry is considered the backbone of that organization, and everything else is support services. How does a leader convey to the people in quote unquote support services that just because that is what you were labeled under, it does not decrease the value or importance that you have for the organization and for the accomplishment of the mission?
You talk about the military, and many times public safety has a very military type structure, right? Command structure, et cetera. And there are things that, quote unquote, come from up on high, filter down to us small people. When I joined RapidSOS, there was a difference I had to adapt to. And the difference is, it's called a lot of terms, but we use the term decentralized command for our team. And it's, again, you have authority to make decisions. Well, what authority do I have? You have the authority of everything I have authority of. Vice president, you act as a vice president if you want to. Everybody leads. I don't care where you're at, you're leading. And the way you measure leadership is influence. So even the first person who's come in, the most recent hire 3-4 months ago, they're influencing the way we do business because they have better ideas and better insights for their region or their customer base, or maybe it's something about some new technology. So everybody leads. And when you start realizing that, and you have to voice that on a regular basis, people get uncomfortable. And they get uncomfortable because for our comfort zones as humans, it's, hey, give me my parameters, allow me to operate those parameters, I feel safe. Amazing. That's awesome. How do we expand that to say you're also safe if you need to make decisions on the fly that may impact people's lives? That you feel like, hey, we talked about this earlier, this decision is going to impact this person's survivability or their recovery or their finances, whatever it may be in this accident scene, but I know it's the right decision to make right now. That's tough for us in public safety. It's very difficult.
I agree. And it goes back to the whole manager thing. I think the managers struggle with, just because I have the formal authority doesn't mean that I'm the best person in the best position to make the decision about what's happening now. There are times where a dispatcher sitting at a console has a more complete view of what's going on because maybe the call hasn't been inputted from their partner yet, but they know this call is coming down the pike. And when they go, they're trying to utilize resources. They are in a better position to make a decision on those that resource utilization than the sergeant or lieutenant or even the police officer is. But we have to trust each other, and it's difficult to trust if I don't see you as important as I am. And so I think leaders have to convey that. And I hate using the word importance because it seems like we're searching for recognition, but that's the only word I can come up with. But if I have an understanding, a deep understanding of where I fit at in the organizational mission, I'm much more ready and much more likely to step up and do what's needed.
Man, I'm glad you brought this up. Working in emergency management, I have a friend of mine who's been just a long-term mentor of mine. And we were talking about organizational structure one day. And I was like, I just think there's a better way of doing this. And we always have, the chief is at the top or the director's at the top or whoever it is, right? And so we sat down over the weekend and we just kind of discussed what is the culture we want and how is that reflected in our organizational structure. And we do this here at RapidSOS now. If you ask me for an organizational chart, you're going to get a chart that looks like a tree, where I'm at the bottom. I am sourcing the needs. I am sourcing the resources. I am sourcing the funding. I am sourcing whatever it may be to feed the team. And as you go up that tree, the top branches are the most recent hires because trees grow from the top up. And as they grow, my responsibility at the bottom is to continue to have strength and find more resources, whatever it may be, so they can get the job done. And that's the difference in mindset. And when you show that to your people, hey, I'm not the top down, I'm at the bottom. Tell me what you need. Tell me the resources you need. Where are we struggling at? That also means at the bottom, you look up and you think, I think this branch might need pruning, which is difficult. Or it might need more nutrients, or it's just kind of hiding a little bit. How do we pull those things out? But if you take your organizational chart sometime over the next month and just flip it and play with it a little bit, you'll start seeing the opportunities there to say to your people, you don't understand. You're the mission here. You're the ones that are doing the work. My job is to support you to get that work done. And together, we grow and create our own ecosystem.
And that is a beautiful analogy. But I think what happens in a lot of organizations is the leader at the bottom, that they cut off the nutrients.
Yes, they do.
And then what's even funnier to me, because I'm on the outside looking in, is them looking up the tree, as you said, and they wonder why the branches are dead. And they wonder why they're not growing as much, and they wonder why people are leaving. It's ironic to me that, listen, everybody's short-staffed, but there is a problem in public safety with staffing. And it's amazing to me that those people that cut off the nutrients are often the one that look up the trees. I wonder why nobody wants to be a limb on my tree right here. Exactly. Out on realization that they probably are the problem.
That is so true, man. And of course, we have times when there are droughts, right? There are times that we have to think about this from a business standpoint, of course. But you're right. If I look up and leaves are dying, and then leaves are falling off, and then branches are dying and drying up, that's a me problem. And I think the difference here is leaders understand that, and they own that. They own that. They're like, hey, this person's not excelling because I'm not doing the right things for them. If you interview with us, specifically for the public safety team here at RapidSOS, you're going to hear me say two things. One is, I don't micromanage. I will not micromanage. And the reason is because if I micromanage, I have failed twice. I've hired the wrong person to fulfill the job, and or I have not provided them the appropriate resources, vision, and clarity for what needs to be done. Both of those are failures on my part as a leader, not on them. And when people hear that, like, hey, that's a different mindset than what I'm used to. Some are comfortable with that. They seek that. They yearn for that type of environment. Some are like, I don't think I can do that. I prefer to have like structure. Well, I can't micromanage you. We move too fast in public safety to be micromanaging people.
Absolutely. And so then let me ask your perspective on this, because again, it doesn't matter the industry, but there are certain roles within organizations where there is a ceiling on how high that person can promote. Or I guess using your analogy, how low they can promote, how far down close to the ground that they can get to provide those nutrients. The truth of the matter is, in most organizations, most public safety organizations, you're not going to see someone from the 911 center commanding patrol. And so with that understanding, how does a leader then try to develop people, I like using it, to promote or advance within their current role? How does a leader handle that?
We had a statement. We knew that on average, the TCs that we hired would stay between 3 and 5 years. If we could get them to stay 18 months, they would average 3 to 5 years. What we found, though, is that during that window of time, we devoted two things. One was a promise to them. When you leave here, because you're probably not going to retire from here, let's just be honest. When you leave here, we promise you that you will not find a more challenging job, and you probably won't find a more fulfilling job than being here in the comm center. So wherever you go after the dispatch center, you're going to excel. You're going to be the employee that everybody has wished they ever had, because you can handle stress, high stress environments. You can look at how to make decisions on the fly. You understand the long-term vision. You see the mission, the organization. All of those things play into that. But the second thing I'll say is, you had a little bit of a misnomer there. If you're in dispatch, you get demoted to the road. I'm sorry. I just had to correct that real quickly, just a little tongue in cheek. But again, you think about that, it's just a different skill set. So the other piece is, how do we grow them in the position they're in? I've heard this a lot, and it bothers me, right? And it's many times when we have employees who are struggling, the first opportunity, I've done this before in my own life, is, well, my leadership has failed me. That didn't give me what I needed, or they didn't provide this, or I didn't have a stipend to go to this course, or I didn't get to go to the conference. That may be true, but growth of a leadership is a responsibility of you, not anybody else. Your growth as a leader is your responsibility. either to seek out opportunities or to go to the leadership staff and say, hey, I would like to go to this. Here's what it costs. Or it's every day when I'm getting ready for work and I have 25, 30 minutes to get ready in the shower, brushing my teeth, whatever it is, I'm listening to podcasts. Or it's while I am driving, I am listening to audiobooks about leadership. Or it's, hey, maybe I'm investing my own money to attend some leadership piece. But most importantly, it's I'm taking notes on leaders I appreciate in my circle of influence. And I'm also taking notes on leadership principles I don't. The one thing that I've learned really quickly, I was promoted to supervisor. And one of the first things I did was sit down and write out all the things that I did not appreciate about the previous supervisor. And I made a commitment to myself to not do those things because I knew how that made me feel. And then I wrote down all the things that I did appreciate about them and ensured that I did those. That's growth. That is growth. And that's my responsibility. It took me a while to realize this. It took me a long time to realize that if I want to be a leader, it's nobody else's responsibility. It's mine. And that's the first step in leadership, is taking ownership.
Well, probably one of my favorite words that we use in our training and also on this podcast is the word intentional.
Yes.
If you're not intentional about avoiding the things that you found to be detrimental, and then be intentional about including the things that were positive, you're most likely to repeat the things that you've seen before, the things that you've done before. It's amazing to me the number of leaders that will complain about a style of leadership, and then they get promoted and they are a carbon copy. For our listeners who are younger, carbon copy, it refers to this carbon sheet of paper we used to put in typewriters to make dual copies. But the thing is, it has to be intentional.
Yes.
And I love one of the things that you and I talked about in our prep for this is everyday leadership. This is something that is happening daily, not once in a while, not once a year during in-service training. This is something that should be part of your daily life, no matter what industry you're in.
Yeah. And for the younger group about carbon copy, it's Control V. Control V. I hear my kids say that all the time. Oh, Control V. Right. And that's so cute. But you're right. You say being intentional. We coined the term to our team, intentionality, right? Always looking for the moment to be impactful to someone else. If the measurement of leadership is influence, then I should be intentional as I'm moving through time and space at my job, at my home, wherever it may be, to be intentional to positively influence someone else. Not me, right? I'm not looking for people to serve me. I come to serve, not to be served, right? And that's a key piece of what we're doing here is being intentional about things we do. In our teams, when I first came over, we have major goals. Like we move mountains, literally. And I'm not trying to brag, but I've seen this team do things that I just did not believe were possible. And one of the things that we did was we had a tracker for our KPIs, and everybody had individual KPIs, but you could see each other's trackers. You could see how they were doing. And there was a little box beside their name that says, I'm doing okay. I'm struggling. I'm falling behind. I need help. And if any of those boxes were checked for I need help or I'm falling behind, people would come to you and say, what do you need? How can I help? Here's what I did that this works better for me. Here's an easier way of doing this. And all of a sudden, a culture begins to grow around that. And the trust that you have in that team begins to deepen. And all of a sudden, you're hitting milestones you never thought were possible for the good, for us, the good of humanity. That's tough. That's tough in public safety to say, I want to be in public safety. Why? Well, I want to help people. Awesome. You know what we never say? I need help. We're all about helping others. But we very rarely raise our hand and say, you know what, I'm struggling and I don't understand, or I need help. Who can help me? And that's the trust and vulnerability that we need to grow in public safety. Man, is it uncomfortable.
We've talked about this before on the podcast. That requires the leader to be willing to be vulnerable in front of the people that they've been entrusted with. And so one of the other things that you and I talked about that I want to hit on real quick is that there is an individual responsibility to lead on a daily basis, to lead where you are, like we said in our thing, Step up where you are with what you have and do what you can, right?
Yes.
But there's also an organizational responsibility to put those formal leaders in place properly. To quote a good friend of mine, Rick Mitchell, people should not be able to loiter their way to the top. What you and I also talked about, we should not be able to loiter our way to be a trainer. If you've been here 5 years, you're now the trainer. How should leadership handle ensuring that the right people are in place and that we're not just giving things out based upon seniority?
Whew, boy, if I took some hard hits on this one. Once upon a time in a land not too far away, I promoted someone to supervisor who had only been in the organization about 3 years. And I took a lot of grief because there were folks there who'd been there 15, 20 years, etc. And they're like, well, can you explain yourself? Yeah, absolutely. I need a leader. I need somebody who cares about the people. That's not there to say, hey, I deserve this because I've been here 10 years. Presence is not proficiency. It's not. You can be in a situation or in an environment for 10 years. But if you're not continually actively looking to better yourself and your environment, you're just taking up space. Maybe you're doing the job function. That's great. Stay employed. Get your paycheck. Amazing. But if you want to be a leader, you've got to find ways to get past that Peter principle, right? Well, I'm a good telecommunicator. I'll make a good trainer. I'm a good trainer. I'll make a good supervisor. Make him a supervisor. You're kind of a sucky supervisor. What happened to you? Oh, well, first of all, I didn't invest in you as an organization. And second of all, I just promoted you because it was easy for me. I wasn't willing to have a hard conversation. I'm very fortunate. I am a byproduct of the Peter principle. 100% admit it. Like my work throughout my career has been because I've been good at one thing. I got promoted to do something else. That's great. And that's fine. But it wasn't until I became director that I started thinking about what is my role now? Because I loved operations, man. I loved it. Like I loved it. And I tell folks I was telecommunicator and then trainer and then supervisor. And then I was ultimately demoted to director. And they stuck me in the back room where I probably belonged. Right. But then I realized, well, my mission has changed. Right. My mission is now the good of the people I serve, the populace, and it's the people below me. Right. Quote unquote below me. And I had to have a hard look at myself because I was still not operating in that level yet. And I was very fortunate to have a board of directors, to have fire chiefs and sheriffs, etc., that would sit me down and say, hey, dude, you're going to have to step up in this role, or you're going to do a little bit better here, or this is a great job. How do we do this here? Those things are incredibly important. But again, you're right, Michael, it comes back to trust and vulnerability. Vulnerability is such a superpower that we are terrified of. And I get it. But when we start leaning into vulnerability a little bit, we grow trust. And when we grow trust, we can grow ourselves.
And I would say that if we grow our people, that's probably the ultimate goal. And so anybody who listens to my classes or listens to this podcast, they know that perhaps my favorite podcast is the Human Behavior Podcast put on by the guys from Arcadia Cognerati, Greg Williams and Brian Marin. And one of their recent episodes was called Currency versus Proficiency. I think one of the roles of a leader is to go beyond being current, that you've checked the boxes to maintain your certification in whatever profession it is, and ensuring that your people are proficient. Because the truth of the matter is, it's been my experience, is that people are more willing to step up and be the leader that we need them to be on an everyday basis, the more proficient they are. It begets a competence that is needed in order to be willing to step up.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the proficiency thing there in public safety is something I struggle with a little bit to understand. Like, yes, learn this new tool, learn this new situation, learn this new CAD system, etc. I began training as a human tracker. Basically, when somebody's lost, the sign they leave behind in the natural environment helps you narrow down the search parameters and the search cone to find that person faster, right? To close on that person, whether it be absconded individual or whether it be someone who's lost, small child, whatever. And the gentleman I was training with, he's a master tracker, and he's like, look, you've got to see this as your craft. And your job is to become so good at your craft that people inherently, automatically, when something happens, no matter where they're at, they call you. Like, hey, If I know that if I have an issue here in my house with plumbing, I know who I'm going to call locally because they have proven themselves at being that mastercraft level. The same goes for electricians. The same goes in public safety. Who's the person in your mind right now you're thinking of that's like, man, if I could get to their level and operate the way they do and treat people the way they do, that's where I want to be. Then find a way to be in the presence of that person as often as possible because they will lead you that path.
It's so ironic that you said that. Our guest last week, Victor Loria, talked about he made a decision in his career that he wanted to be the person that people came to when they had a question. You know, if you're a computer programmer, if somebody's struggling with some code, you want them to come to you because you're the one that's going to help them work through the problem. I think that is what leadership is all about, especially when we're talking about leadership at all levels. Kind of leads into one of our last things that I want to talk about here. One of the ways of truly becoming proficient in your profession is membership in professional organizations or organizations for the 911 side, like NENA and APCO. From a leadership perspective, how important is it to be not only members, because there's a lot of members in a lot of organizations, but I don't mean anybody's doing anything. How important is it to be an active member in organizations like that so that, again, we don't have to keep learning the hard lessons. I can learn from the lessons of others.
Oh, man. I love this topic. We are really comfortable in our microcosm, right? Our organization, our geography, our town, our county, whatever it may be, we're super comfortable. We're well known there, right? And then you start stepping into some roles. Maybe you volunteer for a working group or you're on a board with NENA or APCO. And all of a sudden you realize, maybe I'm not so hot, right? But then all of a sudden you're in the presence of people, right? You're surrounded by these amazing people. And you're learning and growing together, and you realize they have the same concerns that you do. I hear what we service roughly 5,500 DCCs, 5,500 DCCs. That's our customer base. And you go in every single one of them, the first thing they're going to say, well, now we do things a little differently here. Yeah, you may do that. But the mission's the same. And you're facing the same problems and the same issues that everybody else is facing. And when we pull ourselves out of our comfort zone, and we deposit ourselves into areas of growth, man, it's fantastic. And mark my words, there's no growth in the comfort zone. There's not. You can sit there and you can survive. That's about it. And I saw this going through the NENA, working on several other committees and boards and things. And ultimately, I had the chance to serve as president of the organization. That's a 4-year stint. So it's second VP, and then a year as president, and then your past president. And I remember coming on a second VP. Somebody says, hey, you only get a year. You know, what's going to be your big push? What's going to be your big thing? And I thought about that. I thought, oh, what's it be about me? As a leader, we're put into positions of responsibility to serve others, right? That's what we should be doing. And so I began thinking about that. And I watched a lot of different folks come up on the stage and different organizations. And, you know, they become a key leadership position or role there. And they talk about, you know, oh, my life, I did all this and I did all that. And I faced these hardships and I'm here today and I feel super. That's amazing. But there should be an obverse to that as well. To realize that when you're put in a position of leadership and you walk up on a stage or you walk up in front of a crowd or you walk up in front of the people that you're serving, it isn't about you. It is no longer Jamison on stage. It's the president of the organization on stage. And everything that comes out of your mouth and every mindset action you have should be focused on that during those moments. That's tough, man, because you want to look back and say, hey, the highlight of my career was NENA president. I really rocked that. But really what you say is, man, I never had the chance to serve so many people as I did during that organizational moment. And for me, that's huge. And I love that. So if you are not involved, find something. Jump in with both feet, start small, whatever it may be. Start at your state level. Every one of these organizations, NENA, APCO, both, police chief associations, fire chief associations, et cetera, have a statewide component. Get involved. And you may find that you really are the shit. And you may find that you're not, right? But at the end of the day, you learn, you grow, you adapt, and you're open to new experiences. And you can start that process of thinking, wow, I have a long way to go. And Jamison has a long way to go.
But you know what, though? It's empowering if you find out you're not. As long as you're willing to go, as Victor talked in an episode last week, the best way he's found to increase your proficiency is to have more questions and answers. And what better place to have a bunch of questions than in an organization filled with the professionals from the profession that you're in?
You know, I think that you've nailed that too. As you grow, I think you move from being a problem identifier, oh my God, this is wrong, to a problem solver, because that feels good. Oh yeah, I can solve that for you. Let me take care of that for you. But we've been trying to teach our people to be solutions architects. And what's the difference? You bring me a problem, maybe you're new. You bring me a problem that we've been dealing with for a while and we have the answer to. We're like, awesome. I understand that problem. Could you come back with 2 or 3 options about how you would like to proceed, maybe tomorrow morning? Sure, I can do that. And when they come back, like, that's great. Which one would you like to do? Which one do you think actually fulfills the problem solver for you? And they'll say, hey, I think it's option B, but I really want to try option C. Go for it. Let me know how it works out for you. Now, if it's something that's an immediate threat to life or it's a threat to operations, etc., step in. But there are a million opportunities to have small incremental growth with your teammates by allowing them to be solutions architects of their own problems. Because if you're just solving problems all day long, you're a manager.
Yep. And that's not our role. That's not our purpose, or shouldn't be, I guess. And so speaking of roles, can you kind of explain for our listeners what role, what it is that RapidSOS does in the business world and how they serve? Because listen, you're serving the community vicariously through 911 centers, aren't you?
So the role that we serve is, for folks who are listening who may be familiar with 911 services, we're an aggregator of data during emergency incidents, whether it be, significant incidents like hurricanes, tornadoes, et cetera, or it's car crashes, or it's, the person who fell riding their bicycle with an Apple Watch. That data from that device or that vehicle or that community, whatever it may be, the building itself, gets passed into RapidSOS at moment of incident, not time of call, moment of incident. And then we're responsible for routing that information about that incident to the correct ECC anywhere in the United States, Mexico, Canada, and there's several other ones. And so why is that important? Every time the 911 call rings, right? And we're sitting there and it's quiet. All of a sudden you hear it start to ring and you pick it up. You have no idea what's on that line. It could be something simple. Hey, my power's out, to someone like, hey, my child is drowning. The data we're delivering today appears in our platform that we give to comm centers for free. So they can see the incident. They see the location. They see information about that. Hey, this is an Apple Watch. The fault detection, here's the person's information, here's their emergency contact information, here's where they're standing. All those things are provided to them, their health information, etc. And they're looking at that and they assume and say, hey, we have a fall up here on the course over here where they're having the bicycle-a-thon, whatever it is. And we can take a breath. And the phone rings. 911, where's your emergency? Yes, we've had a bicycle accident. Okay, I see you over here, blah, 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 blah. We can process that call. The reduction in stress on telecommunicators is incredible. With a shortening time to dispatch to getting the correct services on the correct scene in the correct manner of time possible is huge. And so we're starting to see that this major change in public safety now to where there are more and more devices telling us about an incident long before a human has to interact with it called 911. And that's important for us. Today, RapidSOS connects to 550 million devices. That's more than the entire population of the United States. And that number has grown exponentially. It's increased 20-fold in the last few years. And the amount of packet data that we're sending through, the amount of incidents and stuff that we're sending from not just a telecommunicator in the comm center, but also to first responders in the apparatus, or maybe it's in the police vehicle, whatever it may be. Last year we did 3.3 billion payloads. And again, that's scary. It's a lot of data. Data is information used to make a decision. And if you ask telecommunicators who've been doing this for a little while, would you rather see the information come in first and understand the incident before the phone rings? Or would you rather try to get that information from a caller who's never called 911, who's struggling on the incident, who's overwhelmed in the environment they're in, and they're giving you partial information, when you can have a good understanding of what's going on and the level and severity of that, the time it occurred? They're going to tell you, give me the data. because it helps me understand the entire situation. It protects my first responders, and it allows me to have less stress when I answer the call. And for me, in my service here, man, God, it's amazing. I love it. I love seeing people who understand data and they like smile. We have videos of telecommunicators talking about RapidSOS, and they're smiling and laughing. And I love that because you don't see that very often in public safety, because they understand we're doing two things: shorten the time to dispatch. Absolutely. Reduce stress in telecommunicators, because they are the linchpin. Every call, they are the point of contact, and there is no response without them.
I like to refer to the folks that work in our dispatch centers as our first responders.
Absolutely.
They really are. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but what it sounds like is that you provide a tremendous amount of data in a way that puts things in context, that allows intelligence to be developed by the dispatcher so that the appropriate resources can be provided to the community.
100%. And we parse the data, not just in the way hey, this looks cool. I like this font. No. We go out to telecommunicators. We sit with them. We have them look at our product. We have them look at our data flows. Tell me how this works. Tell me what doesn't work. What needs to be highlighted the most during a car accident? What needs to be least? Do I need to know the guy has allergies? Probably not. Do I need to know they were traveling at 71 miles an hour in an Infiniti QX35 and they had 3 rollovers and 2 airbag deployments and there were 5 occupants but only 2 were wearing seatbelts? Yeah, that's important to me. And I can know all of that before the first phone call comes in. So now I can actually start thinking about the response to paradigms. Do I need a helicopter? Do I need multiple units? Do I need 3 ambulances, et cetera?
That was something I never considered. Man, if I know how many occupants and I get there and the occupants that I find are unconscious, it's nice to know I can do a head count and say, you know what, I'm missing one. I need to, that means there's probably an ejection or there's someone in the vehicle that I've missed. It allows for a more complete response, not just appropriate response.
I like to use the word wiser response, and sometimes it falls on deaf ears, but like it is, right? We talked about this before we started, right? What is the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Knowledge is knowing a tomato is fruit. Wisdom is knowing it doesn't go in a fruit salad.
Exactly.
Right. And it's just the difference of a wise response is I can turn the tires I need to turn, or I can keep those folks available for the next incident. And we waste a lot of money on false calls. And we've been attacking that one for like the last 12 months at RapidSOS. How do we remove the false calls, the false signals from ever getting to the end user to start turning tires? Because we know that's a huge pull on local resources. And nothing worse than being in a small town like my own, right? You respond to a fire alarm at the nursing home. That's everybody goes, because the potential there is massive, even though it happens every 3 days. And you're on the scene and you're clearing the building for this fire alarm that's false, bad panel, whatever it may be. And then the school bus accident comes in. Where's your resources at? Right. Well, they're trying to clear up the scene now over here. And we could save so much time and save lives and suffering by understanding a correct application of the resources in need, tied to the level of severity of response for that incident.
As we close here, what it sounds like, it not only impacts the call that you're dealing with at the time, but it has impact on future calls. I saw a study years and years ago when I went to staff and command that said that once you start sending police cars out of district to respond to calls, then 75% of the calls that you respond to thereafter are going to be out of district. And what that means is you've got people who aren't as familiar with the area and you've got increased response time. So if I can get this one call right, there's this domino effect that I'm going to have a shorter response time at the next call. And that's the kind of thing that has the potential to save lives. And there's nothing more powerful than that.
Yeah. And for folks who are listening who've worked emergency services, you know firsthand what human suffering looks like. And we talk a lot about saving lives. The vast majority of the calls we respond to is a human suffering, right? And you sit on those scenes for 10, 12, 13 minutes waiting for the next available unit to come and assist to help alleviate this human suffering. That's tough. A lifetime, a career of that is tough. If we can help that process, the life we save may not be the person in the vehicle. Maybe it's the person who's on the scene waiting and the stress is just compounding. Maybe the life we save is a telecommunicator. Maybe it's the life we save is them actually being a better father, a better mother, because they're not as stressed as much. There are so many massive impacts in this that we have to stay focused, and we have to lead through the hard times to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
And that is the role of the leader. And so if I could, I just want to give you what my takeaways were from the episode to make sure I got them right, give you a chance to correct me. No matter the profession, we must learn the lessons from the past while looking for the future paradigm changes so that we can be prepared to respond.
I 100% agree with that. We are constantly looking for ways to have a better influence on the people and processes around us, because the only true measure of leadership is influence.
It's very difficult to see into the future if we haven't solved the issues from the past before. So we're just in a cycle where we're dealing with those. I love this right here and probably going to steal it. So therefore it's not plagiarism because I'm telling you I'm stealing it. Hire for culture, train for success.
Yes.
Getting a Jim Collins good to great. It's not a matter of getting the right people on the bus. It's getting the right people on the bus in the right seat. And that's what hiring that way does for us.
Absolutely.
I also love this one right here. I learned the most when I failed the most. Leadership requires the willingness to know you're going to fail at times.
Yep. And I can tell you it's not going to be easy. And you're going to remember it.
It's not always fun, but leadership is always about fun, right? It's about service to others. The analogy of the tree, the flipping of the organizational chart, seeing the leader as the person that provides the strength, they provide the anchor, and they provide the nutrients for growth. But they also have the responsibility for pruning when it's necessary as well.
Yeah. And Michael, I'll give you one more.
All right.
One of my favorite quotes comes from Joshua Chamberlain, just a fantastic American hero at the Battle of Gettysburg. Mm-hmm. He's on Little Round Top, and his commander said, "You're it. You're the left of the line. You hold this ground at all costs." And he said, "I knew a lot about the mission, but I had a lot to learn about the cost. And as leaders, we have to know that this is not going to be an easy path. We've got to walk it, because if we walk it correctly and we lead our people correctly, when they grow up to be the next leaders in organizations, they can learn from our mistakes. They can learn from our costs, and they don't have to have that lesson repeated. And that's a huge burden for us."
It's a huge burden, but that is how your legacy as a leader is developed. When you and I are out of this business completely, ideally, the lessons that we imparted through our leadership carries on to the next generation, and there's no greater reward than that right there.
Yes, sir.
Well, Jamison, I can't thank you enough for being with us today. I always enjoy speaking with people that are much smarter than I am, and we will call that mission accomplished today. So thank you so much for being here.
Michael, it's been a pleasure.
For our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. And as I always say, if you enjoyed the episode, and we sure as heck hope you did, make sure that you follow the podcast on your favorite podcast provider. You can find this episode and all our previous episode on our website at commandpresence.net/podcast. Look us up on LinkedIn. We do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, and we're getting involved in Instagram or Facebook. Be sure, folks, and we'll have these links in our episode page, but go and check out the work that RapidSOS is doing. Folks, when you talk about directly impacting the safety of our citizens and our responders, that's holy work right there. That's a worthwhile mission. Go and check them out. They're doing some fantastic stuff. Thank you so much for joining us today. And remember, be the leader you wish you had.